So, regarding Sean's yearly reviews / Sean's thoughts, we basically jump from one movie about a character befriending aliens to another one. Elio is a 2025 Pixar animated movie that has not been doing so good, to put it lightly. In fact, this is an animated movie that in general has not been treated very good from the very beginning. As in 2023, I remember that a trailer for Elio popped up and that it was advertised to be coming out in June of 2024, but ended up getting pushed back to June of 2025 instead, as the movie ended up being taken by Inside Out 2 as the Pixar movie that would come out in 2024. Then Disney decided not to give this movie any sort of marketing whatsoever because they were way too busy giving all of the advertisement to the Lilo and Stitch remake instead of an original animated movie, which I personally speculate is part of an intentional sabotage by Disney themselves to make original ideas look like they are inherently a thing of the past, because studios apparently need to rely on older properties to keep themselves afloat, despite the fact that original ideas are the reason why Disney got to where they are in the first place, being similar to what Disney did with hand-drawn animated movies in the early to mid-2000s. But back to Elio itself, I'm not going to go on this rant about how those Disney adults are the reason as to why Disney is not going to do original ideas ever again, because remember, most people who watch these remakes are not aware of internet discourse, so they're not going to simply boycott the movie because an angry culture war brony who is obsessed with constantly trashing on the Star Wars sequel trilogy is shouting at the top of his lungs 24/7. But in regards to Elio, I think that the movie is just decent. Granted, the movie is much better than the Lilo and Stitch remake, though bear in mind, I've always had it in my head that just because a movie is 100% original, that doesn't inherently mean that a movie is automatically better than a shot-for-shot remake. Lewis and the Aliens is still in my bottom 10 for Sean's yearly reviews, and it's gonna take a lot to remove that film from the top 2, in spite of the fact that the movie is meant to be its own standalone movie that is independent from another. Elio is better than the Lilo and Stitch remake, not just because of the fact that it's a standalone film, but the film actually feels like it's trying, as opposed to Lewis and the Aliens and Lilo and Stitch 2025. But the film does still pale in comparison to the original Lilo and Stitch movie, because getting straight into the problems that I have with this movie, this film suffers from a very similar problem that a lot of these recent Disney and Pixar films have been suffering from for almost the entirety of the 2020s decade, where they've either felt incredibly derivative of other films, or they had the problem of being predictable, which really does indicate that studios, Disney specifically, have seriously been starting to run out of ideas. In this film's case, it feels incredibly similar to Lilo and Stitch, as the film revolves around this kid who is considered as an outcast by his peers because of how either crazy or weird he is, which leads him to lashing out against them constantly, while also having to grieve with the fact that his parents are dead, and he's left in the custody of one of his other family members. In this movie in specific, it's his aunt. I mean, the storyline of Elio basically spending all of his time in space is admittedly original to this movie, but the film hardly ever really utilizes this, because as soon as we get there, Elio has to immediately negotiate with Lord Grygon, leading him to being imprisoned, and then as soon as Elio escapes Lord Grygon's ship, he basically uses Glorden as a bargaining chip, which ends up leading to Elio being discovered to have lied to all of them about being the leader, which in of itself is another major problem that I have with this movie. Back during my review on Elemental, I pointed out that the film was extremely predictable, and that the entirety of the film was run on this liar reveal storyline, where you know that as soon as it's introduced, you know that it's going to come back later in the movie. Well, Elio basically does this exact same thing, where Elio basically lies about being the leader of Earth so that he could be part of the same community as these other aliens, though in Elemental's case, it was understandable why Ember lied as much as she did throughout the film, because she promised her father that she wouldn't burst out during the sale that was going on, and she was also under a lot of pressure throughout the movie because she wanted to honor her family's legacy. In Elio, it's way less believable as to why Elio wants to live with aliens, beyond getting away from those who are bullying him. I get that Elio is a kid and all, and I understand that he's fascinated with aliens, but it's kind of unbelievable that he would want to get captured by them. Because even though it's often been speculated if aliens actually exist, something that TV shows and movies often depict about aliens is that they often try to probe or do experiments on those that they abduct. If anything, Elio should probably be terrified if they tried to abduct him, if they were aliens who were specifically trying to do things to him. And given how badly that this movie is paced, it leaves very little room for the characters to really develop at all, or really give us enough time to know about them. The movie starts off on a very sour note, where Elio says something that is incredibly hurtful to his aunt, that is very reminiscent to what Milo said to his mom in Mars Needs Moms, which is not a good sign because that movie is really not good. But the movie does start to go uphill slightly when we get into what the main plot of the movie is, but the key word being slightly, and that the movie doesn't really put all that much focus on the stepmother and son relationship, and the film is very predictable. But does all of this make this movie bad? Well, not really. I mean, I'd probably say that this is one of Pixar's weaker movies, but to be as honest as I can, there are some things that do save this movie from being average, and in terms of Pixar movies, I put this one above Elemental, beyond the fact that there's no characters that I outright dislike in this movie, such as with the fact that the movie does take more risks, though the part of the film where Elio gets into Glorden's mouth to avoid contact with lava was just a whole other level of the word no, especially when Elio says that he doesn't mind it because it feels kind of comfortable in here. But the movie does a very serviceable job with the stepmother and son relationship, even though that's only really showcased in the third act of this movie, but I'd rather have it start off rough, then picks up when the two characters reunite with each other at the end, than whatever Lewis and the Aliens and the Lilo and Stitch remake were trying to accomplish. And if there's one thing that makes Elio a much better remake of Lilo and Stitch than what we got with the actual remake of Lilo and Stitch, is that in the end of the movie, Elio is offered to become part of the communiverse with these other aliens, but then turns it down when he realizes who actually matters, regardless of if the movie just abruptly stopped.
Everything